Hey, what's up everybody? It's Jason. Welcome back to the channel and I hope you're doing well. Today we've got a brand new movie review for you and this time it's Ron Howard's latest, Hillbilly Elegy. So like I already said, this film is directed by Ron Howard and it also stars Glenn Close and Amy Adams, and essentially Hillbilly Elegy is kind of a generational tale. It's told from the perspective of our main character J.D. Vance. Amy Adams plays his mother and Glenn Close plays his grandmother, and his family comes from Appalachia. They're self-described hill people, if you will. He grew up in Ohio and he also just didn't really grow up in the best of circumstances. He had to fight his way through poverty, drug abuse, and just kind of familial tensions throughout his life, but somehow, some way, he makes it all the way to Harvard Law. But like any good action movie, just as he escapes, they try to pull him back in.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
No, of course, that's not what actually happens, but kind of. Even though JD has made it all the way to Harvard Law, he's still not really able to move forward in his own life because of all the trauma he's kind of experienced in his childhood. So off the bat, I think the best thing that this film has to offer is the story itself. This film is based off the memoirs of the real-life J.D. Vance, so the entire film is based off of true events, and really, I just think the story at its core is really beautiful. Not only is it about like overcoming generational poverty, but it's also about family and the pros and cons that come with having a family. Now with that though, I will say that when the trailer for this film first dropped on YouTube, I saw a lot of comments that were kind of like, great, another representation of Appalachian people that are just, you know, like poor, drug users, all this stuff, like really negative stereotypes that people from the area wouldn't want associated with people from the area. And on top of that, I've also seen a lot of news articles just in the title. I, as a policy, don't actually read reviews or watch reviews on films that I haven't reviewed myself yet. But those articles, just based off the title, again, were kind of carrying the same tone of like, okay, this is just another poor representation of Appalachian people, hill people, and it's just inaccurate and just compounding to the stereotype. And of course, not being from the area myself, I don't really have any ground to stand on either way in that argument. But the only thing I'll add to that is because this film is based off the memoirs of J.D. Vance, who actually went through these things, and this is his life story. And, you know, to be fair, I don't know how faithful the adaptation was from memoir to script, but if it's close enough, I don't think we as an audience are really able to judge, because this is a story told by someone who went through it, and you can't really change that. But that's all I'll say about that. But again, the main point I was trying to make here is that when it comes to Hillbilly Elegy, I think the story of J.D. Vance is the most compelling part. Another really strong component of this film are the performances themselves. The two standout ones for me are, of course, Glenn Close, who plays JD's grandmother, and Amy Adams, who plays JD's mother. JD's grandmother is very much a tough love kind of woman. She actually kind of reminds me of my own grandmother. You know, strong, stubborn, you know, at times maybe a little politically incorrect, but her heart's usually in the right place if you look hard enough. And I think Glenn Close does a fantastic job in this role. I think my favorite scenes of her in this character are kind of when she's protecting JD and his sister from, you know, their mother, basically shielding them from seeing things that no child should really ever see their parent do. And that of course leads me into Amy Adams' performance. I think overall she does a great job in this role as JD's mother, but there are times when I wonder if she was reaching a little too far out, perhaps overacting, and I don't want to place the blame entirely on her. I don't know if it was the direction or the writing or her performances and choices as an actress, but there are times where I wish she would have just held back and relied more on nuances than like exaggerated screaming or motions that just kind of too over dramatized the character to the point where she almost became like one-dimensional. But we'll talk about that a little more later in the review. The last thing I want to talk about before we get kind of into the negatives of this film, for me at least, was Ron Howard's direction. Visually, I think he had a couple of really wonderful shots, especially early on in the film. There's this one scene in particular that takes place at kind of like a stream that all the kids hang out in, and there's something about the way it's directed and what we see is just so organic feeling. I guess the way the sun shines through the branches, the way it hits and like kind of glistens off the water, I just thought it made for a really beautiful scene. And on top of that, perhaps, you know, even more importantly, I think he does a really good job of keeping the momentum going throughout the entire film. The majority of this film takes place through flashbacks. It starts off kind of with present day JD, but he's looking back in his childhood. And with that kind of setup, I think it could be really challenging to maintain momentum and just to have story structure work properly. So it's really kind of a hats off to him and the editor of this film for placing all those sequences in the right place to make it feel like a cohesive narrative. So as far as negatives go, there's obviously nothing that tanks this film that makes it a bad one, but there are a couple of things that I would say that have kind of held it back from being a really great film. The first thing that comes to mind is kind of what I was touching on earlier with Amy Adams' performance and the idea that her character was kind of perhaps over dramatized. So one of the main storylines in this film is Amy Adams' character, Bev, is a drug addict, and that presents challenges for JD in his childhood and his present day, and it's kind of what's forced him to kind of reconcile with everything in his childhood. So I don't know if it's because of the drug addiction, but there are a couple of scenes where Amy Adams' character, Bev, goes just completely off the rails, is abusive towards JD and his sister, and just flips out completely. And the problem I had with those scenes, and the reason I say there might have been some issues with overacting in them, is because there didn't feel like there was any real build-up to the fact that she just snapped. Really, it was more like a switch that you flipped on and off, and maybe that was supposed to hint at like a bipolar disorder or something like that, to just, you know, kind of go from one extreme to the other so quickly, because that is kind of what happened. But one scene in particular in a car, and I don't want to spoil anything, but they're having a normal conversation, and before you know it, she's hitting JD, calling him names, cursing him out, all this horrible stuff that you would never want a mother to do to their child. It's just, like, she's the definition of 0 to 100 real quick. And again, I don't want to blame Amy Adams. Maybe it was a directorial decision, maybe it was just in the script, there wasn't really any dialogue to build it up or any actions to build it up. But I really did feel that the aggression just came on so quickly and without warning, that, and maybe that's what they were going for. Maybe they were trying to hint at something, but it just came on so quickly that I didn't buy it all the time. And the other issue I kind of had with this film was the narration. I'm not one to bash on narration just because it exists and it's there. It's just that in this film, I think I would have preferred it without, because I felt like there wasn't really anything added with the narration. Like I said earlier, this film is told from the perspective of JD, so when we go into those flashback sequences, we get a lot of kind of narration. And the thing is, I think we would have all been completely fine without that narration. I don't think it really added anything at the end of the day. The story could have stood on its own without any of that assistance, and now that I think about it, I think that's actually how I would have preferred the film. I think it can kind of speak for itself, and with narration that just kind of explains, you know, time period, or maybe how a character was feeling or what was going on at that specific point in time, I just didn't think it was necessary, and I think that the story really it could have handled itself. But despite those two things, I think this movie was still really enjoyable. Like I said, the performances are great, and the story, and the fact that this is, you know, based off of a true story, is really wonderful, and it's great to watch unfold. I'm gonna give Hillbilly Elegy a 6.5 out of 10. Alright, so that's gonna do it for this review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like or subscribe below. It really helps out the channel. And until next time, stay safe, be kind. Thank you.